11 in Ridenour, avoid going to 5-4 overall and below 500 in section. Primera gives it off the goal. 3 seconds. Primera for the lead is blocked.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jack Ridenour and Sean Meyers.
And we welcome you into another edition of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast here on the Westmoreland Sports Network's YouTube channel. I'm Sean Meyers, joined by the incomparable Jack Ridenour. Jack, a busy show to get to. Of course, we'll have our regular segments, plays of the week, our team of the week, which is the Jeannette boys, who are off to an unbelievable start. We'll also look ahead at the upcoming week. But first off, let's begin with our starting 5 takeaways, the biggest stories from this past week. And it was kind of an abbreviated week because of the holidays. Of course, New Year's was last Wednesday, meaning Thursday, Friday, Saturday were really the only opportunity for meaningful matchups. But we had some developing stories, and we'll start on the boys' side. A marquee matchup that actually took place on Saturday. It was scheduled for Friday, got postponed, pushed back a day, and it was Greater Latrobe defeating Penn Trafford. And this really turned out to be a crucial one. You look at the standings already. And I don't think once you turn to January, I think it's fair to start looking at standings in section play, especially sections that have already gotten 3 or 4 games in. That's the case with this section. And now you see Greater Latrobe creating some separation. It was a narrow victory, a hard-earned one, but ultimately I think one that'll be pretty critical for the Wildcats, who are having a great season despite the fact that they had a pretty lopsided loss against Uniontown. Other than that, they have been terrific, really, from the get-go.
Yeah, and it goes back to how they play basketball. They are very fast-paced, up-tempo, and that's exactly what this game was on Saturday. Same style that Penn Trafford likes to play in, and that's why I think it was early on you saw a lot of up-tempo play, but you didn't see much offense because, again, when you play that rush style, it's hard to slow things down and get some quality offensive looks. But I've been really impressed with how Latrobe is able to pull out some of these close wins. And conversely for Penn Trafford, they continue to get so close, but just cannot get over the hump. It's their 7th game this year where it's come down to within 5 points. So that tells you right there, they're going down to the wire. If I'm not mistaken, it's their 3rd game where it's come down to 4 points. So they're getting close, but it's a matter of closing that gap. And if this Penn Trafford team that brings back a lot of experience from last year, if they want to make a deep run in the postseason and even make it to the postseason, they have to turn some of these close losses into wins. But you give a lot of credit to Latrobe. I know that Coach Wetzel likes to take his team out of town and go play other teams. They did that going to Indiana and getting some big wins there on the road. So presumably that helps out a team also playing out of district, kind of getting some tune-up games there before coming back and playing section basketball. But again, for Penn Trafford, I think the biggest thing for them to address is how they play in the 4th quarter. We've seen them play well in the 4th quarter and pull wins out.
We saw them have that thrilling win in overtime.
Exactly. So they're capable of doing it, but it's just a matter of doing it consistently. And again, if they're kind of teetering in that danger zone right now, where if they don't quickly find some answers, like you said, Sean, section play, with this maybe 6-week period, 2 weeks and you're all of a sudden a third of the way through. So you really don't have much time to mess around. And if you're the Warriors right now, you have to start cleaning things up.
Well, Zach Feldman was really anchoring their offense early, but the Wildcats slowed him down as the game moved along. Max Butler on the other side, no surprise. He was kind of the catalyst for the Wildcats' success. And it is a big win. They're now 3-1 in Class 5A Section 1, 11-1 overall. Again, their only blemish was against Uniontown, the team that's ahead of them in the standings. But on the other end, Penn Trafford's now 1-3. So just think if the Warriors had won the game, each team would be 2-2. It would feel completely different. But now PT certainly has some ground to make up. They'll have time, but it's going to have to start sooner rather than later. Well, maybe for the first time in a few years, you could say the same thing about the Norwin girls. They're going to have to start finding a different gear because while there's no shame necessarily in their most recent loss against Upper St. Clair, Jack, because that's a great Panthers team, it just doesn't have the same feel of Norwin teams of the past. And preceding that loss, they had 2 others in the loss column. So a 3-game losing streak. They barely lost 3 games total last year. They lost some really good players. It's hard to replace players like Pelangio and Snowberger and Kobus. But I'm a little surprised that they have sputtered as much as they have.
I think it boils down to the returners that are coming back this year. They're having to step into totally different roles. You look at last year, and Bailey Snowberger is the floor general for them in setting up the offense. And when you have somebody like that leaves, and you don't have a point guard running the show for you. Now, Ava Christopher has done a really nice job running the point. So I think that position has been filled out. But for a player like Kendall Berger, last year she had such a good season, obviously a very talented player, but I think also because you can only do so much when you've got threats like Ava Kobus, Snowberger, Pelangio that can also be offensive threats. So a lot of the times, Kendall Berger is getting maybe the third best defender, maybe the fourth best defender. And now I think this year teams are starting to narrow in on her. They're starting to hone in on her a little bit. And Avery Brozeski is not used to having to shoot the ball as much as she's had to this year. But again, when you drop off with so much offensive production, somebody has to step up. You have Lexi Heller that stepped into a new role and obviously has big shoes to fill in the post department with Lauren Pelangio graduating. But I think that when you've got Brian Brozeski at the helm, I have all the faith in the world because he preaches toughness, he preaches defense, and at the end of the day, he still has three key players that were pivotal in last year's run to the championship. Brozeski played major minutes, Berger played major minutes, Christopher had 16 points in the finals last year. So these are players that have been able to step up in those big moments. And like you said, Sean, this is a really good Upper St. Clair team. I think the roles have kind of flipped now, where Upper St. Clair seems to be maybe that championship level team. Riley Callacay, one of the best players in the WPIAL. She was really fun to watch. But again, I think it boils down to, and we can obviously harp on the fact that Norman's lost so much, but I think it also is just players having to step into new roles.
Well, a team that has had a terrific start to this season on the boys' side is Southmoreland. The Scotties, pretty surprising to me. They are now 8-2. They won their first section game. So 1-0, you don't read too much into that. But the fact that they're 8-2, they've been impressive. And despite the fact that they lost some really good players from a year ago, now they did drop down in classification, but that doesn't always mean that things get easier. But so far, so good for the Scotties. They have to be very happy with where they currently sit.
And I'm really curious about this team because if you look at their numbers statistically, they're averaging the same amount of points they're giving up. I think it's about 0.2 of a point off, 51 points per game offensively and defensively. And you look at that and you kind of say to yourself, how are they 8-2? But, when you're allowing only 51 points per game, you're doing it defensively. So you're getting it done there. But I'm curious to see how they keep this going. If I'm not mistaken, last year, Southmoreland had a really strong non-section play. They came out of the gates hot and then kind of sputtered down the final few games of the season. So we talk about this a lot in sports, peaking at the right time. And sometimes teams come out of the gates hot and then they hit a wall around this time of the year and they just cannot get back into that rhythm. For Southmoreland, like you mentioned, lost Ty Keffer around 21 points per game last year, but you still bring back players from last year's team. And again, players that were probably very much involved in that, I don't want to call it a collapse, but kind of an unraveling towards the end of the season for the Scotties. They know what they need to do and try and clean those mistakes up. So I think what will be interesting to see is how Southmoreland keeps this going into the depths of section play.
Yeah, you mentioned Keffer. He was a terrific receiver for the football team as well as being a great basketball player. I think of Elliot Primus kind of filling the exact same role this year for the Scotties in both sports. The losses they had, albeit just two of them were lopsided. They lost 75-53 against Keystone Oaks and then 72-29 against Central Valley. So that's why the scoring margin is as lopsided. They're winning closer games by and large. Their two losses were pretty lopsided, but nice win against South Park last time out. And they have Waynesburg Central, Ligonier Valley, Mount Pleasant, Brownsville all in their section. I think that they should be able to compete with and probably beat the majority of their teams in the section. So you mentioned they have to avoid kind of a collapse like they had last year. I think they're much better suited this year to make a deep run and to not only get into the postseason, but maybe make some noise as well. A guy who knows all about making noise in the postseason is Joe Salvino, the legendary head coach of Bell Vernon area. And Jack, although he had to fight through some issues with his lineup earlier this year, we mentioned some of his best players were not available in December. He has reached a pretty incredible accomplishment. He is now second all-time in WPIAL boys basketball wins with number 731. Most of those coming at Monessen, of course, the last handful of years at Bell Vernon area, but a guy that has always had great success couple different stops, but one common thread is winning a lot of games. And so full credit to him. And for his Leopards, maybe now is their time to make a little bit of a run as well.
And I'm sure for that group at Bell Vernon, they were well aware of what their coach was encroaching upon. So maybe this is a little bit of a load off of everybody's shoulders that, we can just relax and play basketball. But yeah, Coach Salvino, what a historic and legendary career. 2 state titles, multiple WPIAL titles, 21 section titles, all at Monessen, over 30 years there. So a big congratulations to them. And like you said, Sean, this is a really good Bell Vernon team that could make a ton of noise later this season.
Can you imagine coaching long enough to get 700 plus wins, Jack? That's
a long time.
Unbelievable. Yeah,
that's a very long time. Longer than I've been alive.
Maybe he has a chance to become number 1 all time, depending on how long he wants to do this, because he's going to be winning double-digit games every single year, and hopefully gets well into the teens with the Leopards more times than not. Don Graham of North Catholic fame is number 1 in WPIAL history. We'll see if that's in the crosshairs when it's all said and done for JoJo Salvino. Wrapping up our starting 5, our big takeaways: Greater Latrobe girls. They continue to impress. I had a chance to see them, and they came up just short against Penn Trafford before the Christmas break, but they bounced back and got a couple of wins against a few other Westmoreland County foes, one non-conference against Hempfield area, which has been very good in Class 6A, so that's a nice win. And then a convincing victory against the Kiski area Cavaliers. And Mackenzie Livingston really has their team playing at a high level, in particular their star senior Carly Burke.
And not to mention, they've got an interesting road ahead of them. 2 of their next 3 games are at home, but then they wrap the season up with 3 of their final games on the road. So that tells me right there, these next 2 home games are pivotal because the road for them is going to be tough. They do have a rematch with Penn Trafford later in January, so that will be also something to watch. But again, I think this Greater Latrobe team, they are very interesting to watch because despite losing to Penn Trafford, I feel like that was a game that was still very winnable for Greater Latrobe. And I'm sure that when you take on a team, again, very early in, or not very early, but earlier in the season, you're still figuring lineups out. You're still figuring your offense out. You're still figuring your defense out. And I think now that maybe things have started to gel a little bit more for Latrobe, they're letting things come together more, that it's going to be a totally different ballgame against Penn Trafford. But for Greater Latrobe, I think that they're, again, very different for Southmoreland, where they're starting to peak right now, and it's kind of a crossroads. Do they keep going? I think Latrobe is kicking into high gear at the perfect time right now, and it's just a matter of staying healthy and keeping this going deeper into January.
Yeah, Maggie Meyers, another key component for them. And I think their matchups against Indiana are going to be crucial because that's another team that I think most people consider co-favorite or at least one of the top contenders in there with Penn Trafford. So they're 0-1 against the Warriors. We'll see how they fare against the Indians as well. That'll do it for our starting 5 takeaways, but it's a fast-paced show just like the sport of basketball, so we quickly transition to our plays of the week, and we'll begin with the Franklin Regional girls as the Panthers notched a crucial win against Fox Chapel on Thursday, and an exclamation point came on a connection between a pair of 6-footers as Torrin Fulton hooked up with Alyssa Bridges to seal the win in the final minute, with myself and John Bainbridge on the call.
Many times tonight brought it across the timeline. Down to a minute left. Bridges, great cut, great feed, and a terrific play. Maybe
that's where she
it.
wants the ball. That's where she wants the ball. Down at the hoop.
Jack, awfully impressive when you can have 2 6-foot girls basketball players on a play like that. The pass, the cut, the finish. Very well done, and Bernie Puchka deserves a lot of credit. It's his 4th year at the program, meaning he has coached all these girls for the entirety of their high school career, and we're starting to see the fruits of the labor, as they say, for Franklin Regional. That's a team that's really impressive so far this season. We'll continue plays of the week with Norwin boys, and the Knights won a thriller at home against Mount Lebanon on Friday. It was a defensive play by Nate Coots in overtime that assured the victory, as detailed by Jack and Roger Downs.
Now Lebanon trying to avoid going to 5-4 overall and below 500 in section. Famera gives it off the goal. 3 seconds. Famera for the lead is blocked. At the buzzer, flipped up by Kokit, but that's it.
What a block.
What a rejection by Cooch. The game-saving denial. And the Knights prevail to win 51-49.
What an incredible job by Nate Cooch on this block, not to mention avoid fouling. But I will say, Mount Lebanon, they had that last-second prayer over their head. I thought it was going to go in. That's why I stopped for a second. It didn't, but what a win by the Norwood Knights.
Absolutely, big time. And one thing you know about WPIAL boys basketball, Mount Lebanon's usually going to be a contender. So for Norwood to win a game like that against the Blue Devils could go a long way towards their confidence, because they know the track record that comes to some of the opponents. So when you can take down a team that has been in WPIAL championships and won so many games, it can only help your cause from here on out. We'll continue and wrap up Plays of the Week with the Greater Latrobe boys in a rare Saturday section clash we talked about earlier. They outlasted the Warriors. A big part of that triumph was the play of Max Butler and Ian DeServe, and that duo connected on a nifty layup to put Greater Latrobe in front of the fourth, with Dan Flickinger captioning the play.
Wetzel able to accept that pass despite falling backwards. And now Butler, shot fake, now he goes underneath. Oh, nice basket by Ian DeServe. Back to the basket.
Now, it was a great play, Jack, but the real question was, how do we grade Mr. Flickinger?
I'll give him a nice A. I'll give him B plus A, knocking off some of the rust. Did a great job stepping in on a Saturday. They were talking about it. Him and Biz were talking about Saturday basketball. It's a very different feel, and I think the same can be said for broadcasters.
Yeah, I was supposed to do the game Friday. Didn't happen. You still had your game Friday, so it's weird sometimes how that happens. Certain schools, for whatever reason, have to postpone. Other ones try to, tough it out, play through it. But nonetheless, a big win for Greater Latrobe. Let's now talk about our team of the week, and well-deserved. If you make it to January undefeated, Jack, you certainly are in the discussion for team of the week, and that is the Jeannette boys. They are 10-0, a perfect 10 for Jeannette, and they're doing it very convincingly. They are scoring about 73 points per game and allowing just over 37. It has been complete domination. That includes their most recent section win. They won by 40 at home against Fraser. They also blew out York and Connellsville at the Greensburg-Salem Holiday Tournament. Adrian Batts has his team absolutely rolling. And to be honest, it kind of is a carryover from how they finished up last year with that terrific postseason win in the state tournament against GCC.
I think it even goes back to football season, carrying over from the Gridiron, because a lot of the players that had successful football seasons, like Kamani Brown, they're starting to carry that into basketball. And you hear that a lot about teams that have the success on the football field and it goes over to the basketball court, and bringing those athletes that have that winning mentality. But I think what's so impressive, like you mentioned, Sean, 73 points per game in 32 minutes of basketball. Mind you, there's no shot clock. So again, you don't have to rush. You don't have to get that amount of points up. They're choosing to play this pace of play. And I got to say, this Friday against GCC, that is going to be a juggernaut battle. Basically, I think the winner of that one right now would be the favorite for 2A. And I think I was reading something interesting earlier today about how Jeannette and GCC, they have just made such separation from themselves and everybody else in 2A. And for Coach Adrian Batts, I think it goes back to the experience. You got Kamani Brown running the point. Jace Powell has been a regular and a frequent varsity player over the years. So when you have all of that experience coming together, you have players that have been around the program for a while. Not to mention they had success in football season as well. You're putting
and they beat GCC in the WPIAL playoffs in football, Jack. That I think means a lot, because there's a lot of, especially at Jeannette, even more so than GCC, there's crossover between football and basketball rosters.
Absolutely. And I'm sure, and I guarantee you that those two teams, they have not forgotten that game from earlier in football season. So I think Jeannette can make a ton of noise. And I think over the last few years, Sean, we talked a lot about how GCC was maybe big brother and Jeannette was little brother. I could see that things maybe start to level out this year. I really do, because again, GCC lost a lot. They did bring back a ton, but Jeannette, they didn't really lose much. They didn't lose a ton. That was a major blow to their roster. And so I think that now things have leveled out between the two.
Yeah, I think Isaiah Malik was probably the big loss, but they have so many guys that play key roles. You mentioned Kimani Brown, Jace Powell, Noah Sunder, Xavier Odorizio Farrow, Marcus McGowan. They have some other guys stepping up, McAllister Steele. So they're a loaded team. Now, I will say this. win or lose against GCC, we've already seen that doesn't guarantee anything in the postseason. So you want to win the regular season games. It probably, to your point, might determine who the number one seed is, depending on how the 2 section games go out. But ultimately, once you get to the postseason, that regular season success doesn't necessarily count for anything. And we're to the point now, if you're Jeannette, you want a great regular season, but more than that, you want postseason success. So win or lose on Friday against GCC, it's going to be, they'll be measured by what they do into late February, certainly. But they look well positioned to have a run. Congrats to the Jayhawks, Adrian Batts, and all of his players. They are a very deserving team of the week. We'll wrap up with a look ahead, Jack, and we will note that weather is going to probably short circuit and change some things. We already know one of the games we were going to broadcast on Monday will not happen when it was originally scheduled. But let's look at the schedule as it currently is, knowing that certainly with the forecast, it is subject to change. Boys action Tuesday, Norwin at Pittsburgh Central Catholic, Franklin Regional at Greater Latrobe in a Westmoreland County clash, as is York at Derry area, and Jeannette gets a tune-up at Springdale. Wednesday, Southmoreland at Ligonier Valley. Friday, we have Cannon Mac at Norwin, a game that we will have on WSN. And, of course, the big one, Jeannette hosting Greensburg Central Catholic. That should be outstanding. I would expect a packed gym. Gateway at Penn Trafford, Valley at Burrow, Greensburg Salem at Bell Vernon, Mount Pleasant and Southmoreland, and Deer Lakes, the defending WPIAL champions against Derry area, all on Friday. So that is a enticing slate. Oh, I just lost my light, Jack. We'll power through it. It's okay. I'm not on the sun right now. I promise you. Girls action. As we mentioned, some of these will definitely change, including Cannon Mac at Hempfield. We were scheduled to do that on Monday. That game has been postponed. All right, I'm not on the sun anymore, so we're good. Norwin and Mount Lebanon, Greater Latrobe at Indiana. We mentioned that's a big game as well. Mount Pleasant and Southmoreland, York at South Park, and Ligonier at Greensburg Central Catholic. Thursday action. Hopefully weather is not an issue for these ones. Cannon Mac at Norwin. We'll have that on WSN. Hempfield at Upper St. Clair, a stiff test for the Spartans. Greensburg Salem at Greater Latrobe. Kiski area at Penn Trafford. Valley at Burrell. Mount Pleasant at Bell Vernon. And GCC at Shadyside Academy. That could be a championship preview. Saturday, South Fayette at Norwin and Oakland Catholic at GCC. And we even have some college action back in it this week. Clarion at Seton Hill on Wednesday. That's a doubleheader, of course, women's, men's. We will have that on WSN. We'll also have Cal U at Seton Hill on Saturday. Also on Saturday, a pretty significant one in the PAC, Allegheny College at St. Vincent College. That is also a women's, men's doubleheader. Anything jump out on the look ahead to this upcoming week's action?
Norwin, Pittsburgh Central Catholic for the boys. I think that's a really interesting one for me. Can Norwin continue to build off of what was a really hard-fought win recently against Mount Lebanon? But I'm also curious to see how things work for the Norwin girls as well. I mean, they're playing Cannon McMillan on Thursday. That's going to be interesting to see because, again, we talked about it earlier. Can they keep things going? Can they keep things rolling? And I know that they have Mount Lebanon as well tonight, obviously, depending with the weather and whatnot. But I think that, you know, these two games are kind of pivotal for the Knights because if they lose these two, that's what, a 5-game losing streak heading into the second week of January. That you're really starting to dive into some very scary waters. But then also, I'm really curious to see on Friday, Cannon McMillan and Norwin on the boys' side. You know, so Norwin basketball is in a very interesting spot right now this week. That's where my attention is on this week.
In Seton Hill basketball, the team's kind of trending in opposite directions. The women's team continue. I'm just going to do this, Jack. There we go. We got the light, huh? We'll just put it right here. I'll just hold it up. The women's team is continuing to be incredible. They have just one loss that came out of conference play, but the men are struggling right now. I mean, they got off to a great start, but they've found some tough sledding in the PSAC. So those will be big time matchups. Anytime Cal U comes to town, that's a great matchup for the Griffins as well. That's going to do it for this edition of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast. Hopefully we'll get the light fixed before next week's episode. But of course, you can always check it out archived on YouTube. And of course, go to our website, see all the great content we have there, not just the live broadcast. We have Westmoreland alum Q&As. Mara Suman most recently featured. Jack, you just did a recruiting Thursday with Erica Gribble of GCC as well for her commitment. So each and every day, we've got great content on our website. Make sure you check that out. Follow us on social media as well. But for now, we'll sign off. For Jack Ridenour, Sean Meyers saying we'll catch you next week right here on YouTube on the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network.